I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. 4 years ago, Avey Tare from Animal Collective, Avey Tare, Panda Bear, they kind of make up the two dragon heads of Animal Collective, the indie pop rock group that kind of they're just the essential indie group.
Yeah.
I mean, like to me, when I think indie music, which is a wide, as we talk about all the time, a wide genre.
Very vague, yes.
Animal Collective is the first band that comes to mind. And Avey Tare, being half of Animal Collective, he certainly has a more aggressive approach to his songwriting style, which we found on Down There in 2010. And actually, I don't think we like that album that much.
No,
it was
not
just
all
a
that
little
much.
messy. So now in 2014, he has a new album out, but it's he's Avey Tare slasher flicks right now, and this album is Enter the Slasher House. Now, the reason why I kind of thought it was silly that he would just all of a sudden addend his name to have Slasher's Flicks on it. I kind of thought that was silly, because we're just going to call it Avey Tare just to keep things simple. But the reason why is he actually added a couple members to help him out with this. Ex-Dirty Projectors member Angel Deridorian from the Deridorian planet in the Star Wars universe, and also ex-Ponytail drummer Jeremy Hyman. From the Hyman maneuver. No?
That just sounds dirty.
It is dirty, really. And to be honest with you, it's great that he has these people playing with him. I'm sure it helped the collaborative nature. But I could actually tell very little that there were more people there. Just because, I don't think he allowed them to really affect his songwriting process that much.
Exactly. I think they might have affected the sound a little bit.
Maybe.
Especially when we consider, compare that to, Down There. Down There had a much more stripped down kind of swampy vibe. Yeah, thanks for pointing out. Yeah, Down There. Real great. Anyway, it was a little more stripped down, a little swampier kind of sounding, but this one is a little more eclectic. It's a little more explosive. Now, maybe the two guys he's working with have something to do with that. I don't really know, because as far as the melodic components of the songs, as far as the song structures, the general sound aesthetic that he's using, it's exactly what I would expect from an Avey Tare solo album.
Yeah.
So, what role those two had, I think we probably would have needed to be there to really know. But what we're really looking at more than anything is just the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to characterize Avey Tare's sound, I mean, he always, and I think on this album it's even more pronounced, but he always has these big beats. I mean, the beat is so important to any Avey Tare song. He also then does a lot of electronic layers, little fluttering electronic melodies that kind of whoop in and out. And he also has, the big kind of in the background, the big longer notes that go on. Yeah. So it's you have multiple layers of electronics going on. And then his vocals. Avey Tare is not a good vocalist, but he writes good vocal parts that, whether he's just scream chanting in that kind of eclectic Animal Collective endearing way that he does, he is always doing something that's interesting in the vocals, and that is very key to both Animal Collective's music and Avey Tare's solo albums, and something that he should continue to do in the future, because I think that's what brings a lot of allure to fans for his music. Now, he also does a ton of production on his vocals, whether it's just putting all sorts of effects or reverb or just making it sound like he's underwater at times.
Yep.
He's always doing something to distort his vocal presence and make it sound otherworldly. And this album definitely has an otherworldly vibe to it. Lots of explosive drums and choruses and things like that. But there's several songs here, Tom. I don't know if you noticed this. I kind of felt like a discombobulation in this album about how some of the songs really had this poppy vibe, and these others had this more experimental stomp to them, where it was just Avey Tare is just pounding out one musical idea for 3.5 to 6 minutes, and it's just this aggressive, there's not a lot of melody to those certain tracks, and you picked one of them, Ascender, the opener track on this album was one of those tracks.
Yeah, and I think you're right on, because melody is an important part of this album and every track, but it's all about the ratio. There's a spectrum there. Some songs focus more on that, and some songs, the swirling sound effects that create the entire picture of the song take over,
Right.
and then the melody kind of lies underneath. And I think that on Down There we saw a lot more cases where the melody was kind of underneath the mix. Here it's allowed to come out at times.
Yeah, that was more of a mood bomb. Where
Exactly.
This is more about, like, you can actually see and feel and touch almost how he's constructing these songs. It's more about the composition. I'd say the end result is definitely more aimed that way. There were certain tracks here that I did fall in love with.
Yeah.
One of those is Little Fang, which is by far the poppiest song on this record, the most upbeat song on this record. I just couldn't get it out of my head.
That track reminded me a lot of Montreal.
Yeah, it did.
It's kind of psychedelic, but you have that classic kind of Beatles-esque pop melody to it.
Right.
And it's catchy. I mean, it is a great tune. And you're right. It is kind of an outlier for this album because it doesn't really get any poppier than that. Like I said, there's certainly a spectrum there, but a lot of what this album came down to for me was whether I liked the tracks or not. I think that at first I was a little kind of like, who cares on the sound, because I felt like it was something we'd heard from Avey Tare's other projects, and you know, to a certain degree, I think that's true. Once I got to know this album well enough, that didn't bother me as much.
Right.
I thought the sound was fine. I thought it matched with the songwriting, so it really came down to whether I liked the songwriting or not. And I'm right with you, Jake. There are some tracks that I really fell in love with that stuck with me that you know I couldn't get out of my head, and then some that I couldn't really care less about, like That It Won't Grow, The Outlaw, Modern Days, and the last track, Your Car, I think was a great closer.
I thought it was a terrible closer, to tell you the truth. It just kind of didn't do anything. I thought it was the weakest track on the album for sure. And anytime you end a record with a weak track, when you could give somebody the impression that this is the weakest track on your album, you might as well not even include it. You're just wasting people's time at that point.
I totally agree. And one mark of a good album to me, since we've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, is whenever Jake and I pick a lot of different track picks. We did pick some different tracks, but all those tracks that I just named, neither of us picked.
I mean,
and that really tells me that, you know,
there's some serious
track.
There's some serious track displacement here. I mean, just some of these tracks are better than the others. I think Strange Colors, track 10, Roses on the Window was a very good track.
Yeah, definitely.
Also another upbeat track. I did happen to, I think I find that Avey Tare, when he does more upbeat songs, I get more into it, because I think that, you know, there's been certain tracks in Animal Collective's discography where he's done more upbeat stuff, and I tend to like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to ignore the Animal Collective bias if you're well versed in that catalog.
That's very true.
But overall, I just didn't feel like this record had what it takes to be one of the top-notch records of this year. I felt like there was just too many tracks that I just didn't care about, and also just distracted me from a straight-through album listen, which is something I value. Now, I will say this. I gotta applaud the guy for keeping on, and being experimental and pushing his sound forward, because he's really at the forefront of indie music right now, whatever the hell that means. And you know, I just have to applaud anyone who's willing to experiment and push music forward. That is what we aim to do with music reviews, and we gotta respect that when it comes to actual musicians making music. Now, as far as scores, I'm going to go 68, Tom.
68? I'm actually quite a bit higher than you on this one. I'm going to go 76.
Okay.
I found that at first I wasn't too keen on this, but after a few listens, I actually found myself wanting to come back to this album. The big thing keeping me from going even just a few points higher is just some of those weaker tracks that I didn't care for. If this was more consistent in quality, I think it would have been a really great album.
Well, and as we've discussed many times, I think that the album listening experience, having just being able to press play and listen to the whole album in one, cohesive listen, it affects me a lot more than it affects you.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely influenced our score differences. So low 70s from Velocities of Music. Obviously, if you're into Animal Collective, Avey Tare, Panda Bear, any of those works, you're going to want to check this one out. However, this is below our average of 77, 78 range. So it's not going to be one of our favorite albums of the year. Probably won't show up on our list. So take that as you will. What did you think of Avey Tare's slasher flicks, Enter the Slasher House? Please leave us a comment addressing your concerns or praise or whatnot at www.velocitiesofmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesofmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what records you'd like to see Tom and I review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.